You know, it's springtime, and for a lot of walleye anglers, springtime means fishing on a river system. Doesn't matter if you're on Mississippi River, Missouri River, Rainy River, a lot of rivers in between. And for a lot of anglers, anglers love to use soft plastics when they're jig fishing. I think some of it is on a river system. That bait comes flying by in the current. Those fish don't have a lot of time to respond or react, and so soft plastics are durable. You miss a fish, no big deal. A lot of times you'll catch a fish 5 seconds later, where with live bait like a minnow, you're always rebaiting. That's not to say that there's not a time and place for using minnows on jigs, but more and more anglers are embracing soft plastics. Now, when you are dealing with current, a lot of times we're dealing with a little bit more aerodynamic profile, so that way they can cut through that current, because if it's too big of a profile, that current's gonna lift up that jig or lift up that plastic. And so as a rule of thumb, when you're using jigs with plastics, if you're used to using a jig and a minnow, just upsize your jig. Just go a little bit heavier of a jig than what you normally would using a minnow, because you're gonna need a little bit more weight to get that soft plastic profile down next to the bottom. And so some of my favorite profiles are just something that's narrow that'll cut the current. This is a slick shad here, made by Selmo. This is a soft plastic that I caught my biggest walleye of my life on last spring using a long shank hook. That's a Northland slurp jig. But another really popular option is a little bit fatter paddle tail like this. Here's a Shields Pro Swimmer. I like that type of profile if I'm dragging jigs. And so a lot of times I'm either dragging jigs upstream slowly against the current or pitching them. And so when you're dragging upstream, you can use a little bit fatter, a little bit wider profile. If you're casting or pitching diagonally to the current seam, you need something that's going to cut that current. So whether I'm dragging upstream or casting, a lot of times I'm using a super braid or just a thin diameter line. And so last few years, I've really fallen in love with nanofill when I'm fishing current, because that lighter diameter line really cuts through the current. Now with nanofill, you have to be a little bit careful with your knots. And so a lot of times when I'm using nanofill, say I'm using 8 or 10 pound nanofill, I like to use a high vis so that way I can watch the line. But a lot of times what I like to do is just use a fluorocarbon leader below it. And I'll show you here. The best thing that I found for tying that fluorocarbon leader is what's called an Alberto knot, where you take your leader material, which is just a 12-pound fluorocarbon, and you bend it in a U like this, run your nanofill through the loop, and you just wrap it. Usually go about 5-6 times up the loop, just like that. Then you just wrap it back about 4 or 5 times, and then you just take your line and run it through the loop. Just get it nice and wet. Pull it tight. And that's a great knot for connecting braid or nanofill to any type of leader material. And if you've got some debris, you can always leave that knot, tag ends of that knot a little bit longer to collect some of that debris where it doesn't end up on your jig. And typically only using maybe a 2 or 3 foot piece of leader material. And here's a couple things I like to do when I'm running this high-vis nanofill. And some people might think I'm crazy, but just from looking at underwater footage over the years, you look at a river system, there's all kinds of stuff going downstream. There's grass, there's leaves, there's debris. And this high-vis line looks a lot like debris underwater, especially if you have good water visibility. So what I like to do is just take a Sharpie and just color that line, at least the bottom 2 or 3 feet above the leader. You just color that line, and it's just amazing how much that makes it disappear. Just little things that can, help you catch more fish. But, when you're using these type of profiles, when you're casting, a lot of times it's just a matter of trying to position the boat and get the right angle where you can make that good bottom contact without getting that sweep or bow in your line. And so that's why that thin diameter super line is so important. The other thing I like to do is on your soft plastic, you just slide that body back and just put a little dab of super glue and slide that body up, and that'll make your soft plastic a lot more durable, where you typically catch several fish on one plastic. A lot of times you'll lose the tail. They'll bite the tail off before you lose the plastic, and you don't have to worry about them pulling the plastic down. And so just a few things that'll help you catch more fish this spring. But again, soft plastics are an effective tool. You can change the profile, you can change the shape, the size, the color, and you can just do a lot of different things to adapt to the day. And so there's always going to be a time and place for live bait, but I tell you what, more and more river walleye anglers have embraced soft plastics. It's nothing new, it's no secret by any means, but it's just something that catches a lot of fish each spring.